The crystal flute in Seraphina Sterling's perfectly manicured hand caught the ballroom light, a glittering weapon. Her smile, however, was a confection of saccharine and ice, never quite thawing in her eyes as she surveyed the opulent wedding reception. Her opulent wedding reception. And finally, her voice, amplified just so, dripped like poisoned honey over the hushed guests. To my dear sister Evelyn, the, shall we say, cautionary tale of our family. A delicate, tinkling laugh escaped her lips, a sound Evie Thorne knew was meant to draw blood, so thrilled she could finally grace us with her presence. Every head turned. Evelyn felt the weight of their stares, a physical pressure against her carefully composed stoicism. Beside her, little Lily, all of 7 years old and bewildered in her flower girl dress, tugged at her sleeve. "Mommy?" Lily whispered, her brow furrowed with a confusion that lanced Evie's heart far deeper than Sarah's public barb ever could. A muscle twitched at the corner of Evie's eye, the only outward sign of the storm raging within. A cautionary tale. Her own flesh and blood. Would they ever let her forget? The glitter and malice of the ballroom dissolved, the present momentarily receding like a painful tide. 3 months earlier, sunlight, thin and grudging, striped the worn linoleum of the shoebox apartment that always smelled faintly of lemon polish and a lingering hint of Evie's quiet desperation. Evelyn Thorne, 36 years old and running on fumes and fury, moved with the practiced efficiency of a field medic in a war zone. Lily's tangled hair needed braiding. A missing permission slip for the zoo trip needed unearthing from the paper detritus on their tiny kitchen counter. And Evie herself needed to transform from Mommy into Miss Thorne, paralegal, presentable enough for the gilded cages of Hawthorne and Finch LLP, all before 7:45 a.m. Impossible, some might say. For Evie, just another Tuesday. "Mommy, have you seen Sparklehoof's left shoe?" Lily's voice, bright as a new penny, chirped from her own miniature bedroom, a space carved out of what was once a dining alcove. Evie, one hand expertly weaving a plate, the other simultaneously stirring oatmeal that threatened to congeal, called back, "Under your dragon-defending fort, Starlight, where all lost things go to hide." A triumphant, "Found him," followed. Her smile was genuine then, a brief, warm sunrise in the gray landscape of her morning. Lily, her anchor, her reason, her tiny, fierce defender. This was their life. A world away from the sprawling estates and effortless privilege she'd once known, a universe removed from the future everyone had so confidently predicted for her. Blackwood University School of Law, top of her class, a career glittering with promise. Then Julian. Julian Croft, with his charming smile and hollow heart, had shattered it all. He hadn't just left, he'd evaporated, taking their joint savings and her self-worth with him. 7 months into a pregnancy she'd naively thought was a shared dream. The arguments had been brutal, his parting shot echoing even now. "This legal eagle act, Evie? It's not what I signed up for. I need a wife, not a competitor." A competitor. Was that all she'd been? The oatmeal was lumpy. Again. There wasn't money for the instant kind Lily preferred. Not this week. The electric bill sat on the counter, its red overdue notice a screaming accusation. She'd have to call them, beg for an extension, swallow her pride like a bitter pill. Again, the societal slights were subtler but just as corrosive. The pitying glances from other mothers at school drop-off, their conversations hushing as she approached, the overly patient, condescending tone of the bank teller when she'd inquired about a small loan. Denied, of course. Cautionary tales rarely qualified. "Mommy," Lily patted in, Sparklehoof now fully shod, her school uniform a little rumpled. Her eyes, Evie's eyes, bright with an unmarred curiosity. "Were you a princess before I was born?" Evie secured the braid with a worn elastic band, forcing a lightness into her voice she didn't feel. "Something like that, Starlight. A princess in a very tall tower, studying very dusty old books." "Did you have a crown?" "Sort of. It was black and square, and you threw it in the air when you were done with the books." Lily giggled. "Silly crown. Silly indeed, and heavy. So very heavy." Beneath a loose floorboard in her cramped bedroom, wrapped in a faded scarf that had belonged to her grandmother, lay Evie's own dusty old book, a dog-eared copy of Kressler on Evidence. Her lifeline, her rebellion, her secret, burning ambition. Most nights, after Lily was asleep, after the dishes were washed and lunches packed, Evie would retrieve it. The city lights outside her window would blur as she lost herself in precedents and procedures, the hum of the old refrigerator a counterpoint to the silent roar of her determination. Sometimes exhaustion would claim her, and Lily would find her in the morning, slumped over the kitchen table, pen still in hand, cheek pillowed on an open page. Then, Lily would gently cover her with a small hand-knitted blanket, a silent act of love that fueled Evie more than any caffeine ever could. The dream always came on those nights, the ones where hope felt most fragile. A heavy, ornate gavel, suspended in an impossible viscous silence, falling in slow motion, falling, and then, just inches from the sound block, it would crack. Not a clean break, but a spiderweb of fissures racing across its polished surface until it exploded, shattering into a million glittering, razor-sharp fragments. A silent, devastating implosion. Each time she'd wake with a gasp, heart hammering, her hand instinctively flying to the small, worn silver locket she always wore. A gift from her grandmother, the one family member who'd seen the fire in her, not just the pedigree. Inside, Evie knew, lay a tiny, intricately folded piece of paper. She never looked at it. Not anymore. The words were seared into her memory. Justice wears a blindfold, not a muzzle. Speak, child, speak. But how could she speak when her own voice felt trapped, a whisper against a hurricane of judgment? A framed photograph sat on the small, wobbly table by the door. Her Blackwood graduation. Evie, younger, thinner, a triumphant, almost defiant light in her eyes, flanked by her parents, Arthur looking genuinely proud, Eleanor's smile a practiced, brittle thing. And just behind them, a younger Serafina, her expression a curious, toxic cocktail of resentment and something that might have been envy. The golden child, before the gold had tarnished, before the cautionary tale had been written. Evie straightened the photograph, her reflection a ghostly superimposition over that hopeful, oblivious girl. The lines of fatigue around her own eyes were deeper now, etched by too many sleepless nights and silent battles. But there was something else there, too. Something new. A flinty resolve. A hidden strength forged in the fires of humiliation and hardship. "Mommy," Lily's voice, impatient now. "Are you going to wear a fancy black dress like in the movies? You know, like the powerful ladies who tell everyone what to do? Will you, Mommy? Someday?" Evie turned from the ghost in the photograph, a slow smile touching her lips, a real one this time. The question, so innocent, so profound, resonated deep within her, stirring the embers of that fiercely guarded ambition. Someday. Perhaps someday was closer than anyone, even she, dared to believe. Her hand went to the locket, its cool silver a familiar comfort. The path was obscured, treacherous even, but for the first time in a long time, she felt the faintest glimmer, not of a shattering gavel, but of an unbreakable will. Lily's innocent words about a fancy black dress and powerful ladies echoed in Evelyn Thorne's mind, a bittersweet counterpoint to the relentless rhythm of her days. Someday. Yes, that was the fragile, fiercely guarded flame she nurtured in the deepest recesses of her heart. But someday felt like a distant galaxy, especially from where she stood now, a ghost in the hallowed halls of justice she'd once dreamed of commanding. Top of her class, they all said. Summa cum laude. Editor of the Law Review. The bitter litany scrolled through Evie's thoughts as she navigated the bustling corridors of Hawthorne and Finch LLP, a stack of discovery documents threatening to topple from her arms. Then Julian left, and I became a footnote. A harried associate, probably younger than her by a decade, brushed past without a word. His expensive suit a stark contrast to her own carefully maintained 10-year-old blazer. He probably didn't even see her. Paralegals, Evie had learned, were often part of the furniture. Useful, sometimes essential, but ultimately invisible. And how could they see the inferno of a broken promise, the relentless whispers of a new dream, raging just beneath her composed surface? That golden child status at Blackwood University School of Law felt like a story about someone else now, a bright, shimmering mirage from a life unlived. The girl in those memories, the one with boundless energy and a razor-sharp mind who could argue case law until dawn and still ace her exams. Where had she gone? Julian Croft had taken a significant piece of her with him, not just their shared future, but her very belief in her own trajectory. The betrayal wasn't just emotional, it was a calculated demolition. She remembered the final brutal argument 7 months into her pregnancy with Lily, her belly a swollen testament to their once shared joy. Julian, his face a mask of cold displeasure, had gestured dismissively at her meticulously organized study notes for the bar exam. "This obsession, Evie, this ambition," he'd sneered, the word itself an accusation. "It's not what I want. I need a partner, someone to build a life with, not a damn sparring partner who's always trying to score points." And then, the coup de grace. "Frankly, this legal eagle act is exhausting. I'm out." Out had meant vanishing by morning, their joint bank account cleaned out, leaving Evie not just heartbroken but destitute, facing eviction notices and the terrifying prospect of single parenthood with nothing but her rapidly diminishing pride. Can you imagine the sheer, gut-wrenching terror of that? The freefall? Her family's reaction had been a masterclass in thinly veiled disappointment and "I told you so's." Her father, Arthur, a man whose own ambitions had quietly withered on the vine of a comfortable but uninspired corporate career, had offered gruff, uncomfortable sympathy. But it was her mother, Evelyn Thorne, whose words had been the iciest daggers. During one of their rare, strained phone calls, initiated by Evie, always, Eleanor's voice, cool and precise, had flitted over Lily's latest milestones before landing its intended blow. "Well, Evelyn, dear," she'd said, the sigh almost audible through the receiver, "one does make one's bed, doesn't one? Serafina is bringing her young man, Marcus Sterling, such a promising associate at Sterling and Finch, you know, the senior partner's nephew, for dinner on Sunday. Perhaps if you'd aimed for stability, instead of all that striving." The unspoken condemnation hung heavy in the air. You chose this mess, this footnote of a life. And Serafina? Oh, Sarah had reveled in it, her younger sister, who had always wilted slightly in Evie's academic shadow, now blooming in the reflected glory of Evie's spectacular fall. Sarah's condescension wasn't subtle, it was an art form, honed over years of simmering resentment now disguised as pity. "Oh, Evie, darling, still slaving away for peanuts?" she'd trilled during their last excruciating family gathering, her eyes cataloging Evie's department store dress with forensic precision. "You always were too smart for your own good. See where it got you?" The unspoken, "See where it got you compared to me, with my perfect fiancé and my perfect life?" The sting of that broken promise, of her family's profound disappointment, was a constant, dull ache. Her days at Hawthorne and Finch were a blur of photocopying, legal research for condescending junior associates, and coffee runs. Maria Sanchez, a fellow paralegal with kind eyes and a weary smile, was Evie's only confidant, though even Maria didn't know the full extent of Evie's secret studies. "You look tired, Chica," Maria would often say, sliding a contraband pastry onto Evie's desk. "Burning the midnight oil again?" Evie would just nod, a grateful smile her only explanation. Something like that. What could she say? That the midnight oil was fueling a desperate, audacious dream? That the files she lugged home weren't just work, but a smokescreen for the heavy legal tomes hidden beneath them? The routine was grueling, a relentless triathlon of work, childcare, and then the clandestine study sessions. After Lily was asleep, Evie would pry up the loose floorboard in her tiny bedroom, the scent of old wood and her grandmother's lavender sachet a familiar comfort. There, nestled beside the silver locket, lay Kressler on evidence, its pages a geography of her annotations, a testament to her resilience. Fueled by lukewarm tea, she couldn't afford good coffee anymore. She'd pore over case law, her mind, though weary, slowly sharpening, reclaiming its old acuity. Some mornings, Lily, ever the early riser, would find her slumped over the small kitchen table, cheek pressed against an open chapter on hearsay, the city's gray dawn seeping through the thin curtains. The little girl wouldn't wake her. Instead, she'd carefully drape her own small, hand-knitted superhero cape, a bright blue dish towel, over Evie's shoulders. Taped to the refrigerator, amidst overdue notices and school reminders, were Lily's masterpieces, vibrant crayon drawings of Mommy the Super Judge, presiding over a courtroom of smiling animals, or Judge Mommy with a giant gavel, vanquishing grumpy-looking monsters labeled bad guys. These small, innocent tokens of belief were Evie's true fuel. They were the whispers of a new dream, cutting through the echoes of her broken promise. One raw November evening, drawn by a faded flyer she'd seen tacked to a community notice board, Evie found herself at the Hopewell Community Legal Aid Center. It was a world away from the polished marble of Hawthorne and Finch, smelling of stale coffee and desperation, yet thrumming with a raw, urgent energy. She hadn't intended to stay, just to observe, a ghost at the feast of justice. But then she saw Mrs. Petrov, an elderly woman with fear-filled eyes and hands gnarled by arthritis, facing eviction from the tiny apartment she'd lived in for 40 years. Her legal aid lawyer was young, clearly overwhelmed, fumbling his notes, while the landlord's attorney, slick and predatory, circled like a shark. Evie watched, her own legal mind whirring, silently objecting to the landlord's lawyer's leading questions, cringing at the missed opportunities by Mrs. Petrov's counsel. The injustice of it, the sheer imbalance of power, was a physical blow. It wasn't just about abstract legal principles anymore. It was about this woman, about the terror in her eyes. Her grandmother's words, the ones tucked inside the locket, roared in her ears. "Speak, child, speak." And in that moment something shifted within Evie. A cold, hard resolve solidified. This wasn't just about reclaiming her own shattered dreams, or even about providing a better life for Lily. This was about them. The Mrs. Petrovs of the world, the voiceless, the vulnerable. Who would speak for them if people like her, people who knew the sting of being a footnote, didn't find their voice? Did she dare to even try? That night, the city lights seemed to blur into a smear of indifferent stars as Evie sat at her kitchen table, the usual exhaustion held at bay by a new, fierce energy. The Hopewell Center had lit a fire under her, a conflagration of purpose. Before her lay a thick, intimidating document she downloaded weeks ago from the state judiciary website, its precise title carefully angled away from any potential peeking by Lily. Application for judicial appoint. Her hand hovered over the signature line, trembling slightly. The audacity of it. Her, Evelyn Thorne, the cautionary tale aspiring to the bench? The gavels in her dreams still shattered. The weight of her family's disappointment, Sarah's scorn, Julian's betrayal, it all pressed down. Failure wasn't just a possibility, it felt like an inevitability. But then she saw Mrs. Petrov's face, Lily's crayon drawing of Judge Mommy, her grandmother's fierce belief. She uncapped her pen. The ink was a deep, determined blue. With a steady hand, a hand that no longer felt quite so much like a footnote, Evelyn Thorne signed her name. A single tear traced a path down her cheek, splashing onto the stark officialdom of the paper. But this time, it wasn't a tear of despair. It was a tear of defiance, a tear of hope. The first small crack in the dam of her secret studies, a promise whispered not just to herself, but to a world that desperately needed more people to speak. What would happen if they actually called her? The thought was terrifying and utterly exhilarating. Moira gomod vaitin ikkan fai bat chedo hadom chen ingdum thimlay chaiduk. Bangkothe bat chedo nai tai hadom chen ingdum Gemini. That faint, terrifying, yet exhilarating hope Evelyn Thorne had allowed herself to feel after signing the judicial application, the whisper of what if, was about to be bulldozed by the past. It always seemed to find her, didn't it? No matter how carefully she tried to build a new, smaller, quieter life, the gilded cage of her former existence had a way of rattling its bars, demanding her attention. And this time, it arrived via uniformed courier. The thud of the oversized, opulent, cream-colored envelope on her worn doormat was an alien sound in the modest hallway of the Phoenix apartments, a name far grander than the reality of peeling paint and temperamental plumbing. Even before she saw the ridiculously elaborate calligraphy, a cold knot of dread tightened in Evie's stomach. This had Serafina written all over it. Literally. Serafina Arabella Vance Sterling and Marcus Alistair Sterling request the honor of your presence at the celebration of their marriage. The words swam before Evie's eyes, each perfectly formed letter a tiny mocking indictment of her own derailed life. At Hawthorne and Finch the next day, Maria Sanchez, whose desk faced Evie's in their shared paralegal cubicle farm, whistled. "Ay, chica. That looks like it cost more than my last 3 electricity bills combined. Lottery winnings or a royal command from King Charles himself." Evie managed a weak smile, the thick cardstock feeling like a lead weight in her hand. "Worse, Maria. Much worse, my sister." Tucked inside on a separate, smaller card embossed with a truly obnoxious gold cherub was a handwritten addendum from Serafina herself. The ink, a vibrant magenta, seemed to slash across the pristine cream. Mother practically threw a fit, so you're officially summoned. Lily can scatter petals or something equally quaint if she promises not to make a scene. And for heaven's sake, Evelyn, try to find something presentable to wear. We wouldn't want you to feel utterly out of place amongst actual society. It'll be at the Oakmont, naturally. Presentable. Out of place. The casual cruelty of it still had the power to make Evie's breath catch. After all these years. Did her own sister really see her as such a charity case? A blemish on the otherwise perfect portrait of their family? The inevitable phone call from her mother, Evelyn Thorne, came later that evening, just as Evie was trying to coax Lily through a particularly challenging math problem involving too many hypothetical watermelons. "Evelyn, darling," Eleanor's voice was a symphony of strained pleasantries and underlying steel. "You received Seraphina's lovely invitation, I trust?" "Yes, Mother, it arrived." Understatement of the century. "Wonderful. Such an exciting time. Marcus is, well, he's quite the catch, you know. His family, the Sterlings of Sterling and Finch, immense. Absolutely immense. This union is pivotal for Seraphina." Evie gritted her teeth. "I'm sure it is. So you'll be there, of course, both of you. It simply wouldn't do for Seraphina's only sister to be absent. Think of the family's reputation. What would people whisper if you weren't there? That you're still, well, the unspoken hung in the air. Still a failure. Still the divorced, struggling single mother. And that dreadful little apartment of yours, I do hope you're not planning on bringing anyone back there after the reception. We must maintain appearances, Evelyn. Especially now." Eleanor then launched into a critique of Evie's unseen wardrobe, her unseen hair, and her general, presumed lack of social grace, a monologue Evie had learned to endure with a kind of numb resignation. The message was clear: your presence is a reluctant necessity, a potential embarrassment we must carefully manage. "Thanks, Mom. Really feeling the love here." Lily, however, had overheard snippets, her 7-year-old radar perfectly attuned to the word wedding and Auntie Sarah. Her eyes, wide and luminous, sparkled with an excitement that was a painful counterpoint to Evie's own sinking dread. "A wedding, Mommy?" She bounced on the balls of her feet, math forgotten. "With a princess dress for Auntie Sarah? Like in my storybooks? Can I be a flower fairy? Can I? Please? There'll be cake, right? Big cake? And Auntie Sarah needs us, doesn't she? Family helps family, you always say." Oh, the innocent, crushing weight of a child's logic. How could Evie explain the complex, toxic tapestry of her family dynamics to that trusting, hopeful face? How could she say that Auntie Sarah probably viewed their attendance as a social obligation at best, a potential minefield at worst? That the help Sarah needed was for Evie to be as invisible as possible? A few days later, seeking refuge in the dusty, blessedly quiet law library at Hawthorne and Finch during her lunch break, a stolen 30 minutes to pore over her actual studies, the ones that mattered, Evie found her unease solidifying. Tucked away in a carrel, Kressler on evidence open before her, she couldn't help but overhear two of the firm's senior partners, their voices low but carrying in the stillness. They were discussing Marcus Sterling, her soon-to-be brother-in-law. Absolutely ruthless in the courtroom, young Sterling, one of them, a portly man named Henderson, rumbled. That takeover of Aero Solutions? Brilliant, if a bit predatory. Left a lot of smaller shareholders out in the cold, but Sterling and Finch made a killing. The other partner, a woman with a sharp, intelligent face, Evie vaguely recognized as Ms. Albright, chuckled dryly. He plays hardball, all right, both in court and, from what I hear, out of it. Remember that little indiscretion with the intern last year? Swept under the rug so fast it barely made a ripple. Connections, Henderson. Sterling has connections that go all the way to the top, untouchable, some say. A cold shiver traced its way down Evie's spine. Predatory? Indiscretion? Untouchable? This was the man her sister was marrying? The man her mother gushed about? This wasn't just about family drama anymore. A new, unsettling layer of, what? Curiosity, apprehension? Settled over her. What kind of man was Marcus Sterling, really? And did he know the cautionary tale he was about to acquire as a sister-in-law? The thought was a disquieting one, adding yet another tangled thread to her already complex feelings about this wedding. The cost of attending. It wasn't just the emotional toll, the inevitable barrage of pitting looks and whispered comments. It was the practicalities. A dress. Even a second-hand one from the consignment shop would stretch her already anemic budget to its breaking point. Taking a day off from Hawthorne and Finch meant lost wages, wages she desperately needed. Could she really put herself, and more importantly Lily, through that? For what? To satisfy her mother's obsession with appearances? To give Serafina another opportunity to publicly diminish her, she drafted a polite refusal in her head a dozen times. Dearest Serafina, thank you so much for the invitation. Unfortunately, due to a prior commitment. Prior commitment to what? Her sanity? Her self-respect? But then, there was Lily. Lily, who had spent the entire week meticulously drawing pictures. Auntie Sarah, the diamond princess, Lily had labeled one, her tongue poking out in concentration. Another showed Lily the sparkle fairy, complete with lopsided wings and a shower of glittery petals. And then the one that made Evie's heart ache, Mommy the brave queen, depicting Evie in a magnificent, if slightly lopsided black gown holding a tiny Lily's hand. Brave. If only Lily knew how far from brave her mother felt. The decision, when it came, wasn't about dignity or defiance or even about appearances. It was about that shining, hopeful face. It was about not crushing the innocent joy in her daughter's heart. It was about showing Lily that sometimes, even when it's hard, even when you're scared, you show up. For family, for love. Even if that love felt painfully one-sided. With a deep, shuddering sigh, Evie Thorne picked up the RSVP card. Her hand, surprisingly steady now, ticked the will attend, box for 2. A strange cocktail of emotions swirled within her. A heavy sense of foreboding, yes, but beneath it, a tiny, stubborn spark of resolve, fanned by Lily's unwavering faith and the recent vivid memory of Mrs. Petrov's frightened eyes at the Hopewell Clinic. Perhaps this wasn't just an ordeal to be endured. Perhaps, just perhaps, it was an opportunity. For what, she didn't yet know. "Okay, Starlight," she told Lily that evening, her voice brighter than she felt. "We'll go to the ball. We'll see Auntie Sarah become a princess." She knelt, taking Lily's small hands in hers. "And we, the Thorne ladies, will hold our heads so high they'll get cricks in their necks looking up at us." Lily shrieked with delight, throwing her arms around Evie's neck. "We will be the highest queens." Evie hugged her back, a fierce protective love surging through her. Yes, they would. But as she tucked Lily into bed, the image of that opulent invitation, the unsettling whispers about Marcus Sterling, and the memory of her mother's chilling words played on a loop in her mind. This wouldn't be a fairy tale. This would be a battle. And the arena? Her sister's wedding. The thought was a cold stone in her stomach, a chilling premonition of the gauntlet that lay ahead, a gauntlet she now felt strangely, terrifyingly compelled to walk. Even as another, more official-looking envelope lay hidden beneath her floorboards, its contents a secret that felt both a shield and a terrible, exhilarating burden. That single defiant signature on the judicial application form, dried now beneath the loose floorboard of her bedroom, felt less like an ending and more like the pulling of a pin from a grenade. Terrifying, exhilarating, and utterly, terrifyingly secret. Evelyn Thorne had cast her stone into the formidable waters of the state judiciary, half expecting it to sink without a ripple. What would happen if they actually called her? The question had been a persistent hum beneath the surface of her days, a counter-melody to Lily's excited chatter about flower fairy dresses and wedding cake. The answer, when it came, was not a gentle ripple, but a tidal wave. It arrived not in an opulent cream envelope, but via a crisp formal summons delivered to her cramped paralegal desk at Hawthorne and Finch LLP. Miss Thorne, her supervisor, Mr. Henderson, the same portly partner she'd overheard discussing Marcus Sterling, had said, his voice betraying a flicker of something unreadable, perhaps surprise, perhaps grudging respect. "Judge Alastair Finch's judicial assistant just phoned. The judge requests your presence in his chambers. Tomorrow, 10 sharp." Judge Alastair Finch. Evie's heart executed a painful triple Lutz against her ribs. This wasn't just any meeting. Judge Finch was a legend, a lion of the bar, retired now from active practice, but still wielding immense influence as head of the Judicial Selection Committee. A contemporary and rumored close friend of her late grandmother, the formidable Justice Eleanor Vance, whose portrait hung in the hallowed halls of Blackwood Law. He was also, incidentally, the Finch in Hawthorne and Finch, a founding partner who rarely graced their modern offices with his august presence. Why on earth would he want to see her? The cautionary tale? The paralegal footnote? Had someone discovered her audacious application? And was she about to be gently, or not so gently, put in her place? The thought sent a fresh wave of nausea through her. The next morning, standing outside the judge's imposing oak-paneled chambers, Evie felt like a condemned prisoner awaiting sentencing. Her palms were sweating. Her carefully chosen navy blue suit, her best and only interview attire, suddenly felt cheap and inadequate. "Miss Thorne, Judge Finch will see you now," his assistant, a woman whose smile was as starched as her collar, announced. Judge Alistair Finch was exactly as imposing as his reputation suggested. Tall, silver-haired, with eyes that seemed to see straight through to the marrow of one's soul. He regarded her from behind a vast mahogany desk, a landscape of leather-bound books and judicial gravitas. For a long moment, he simply looked. And Evie felt every insecurity, every past failure, every whispered judgment rise to the surface like oil on water. Then he spoke, his voice a low rumble that resonated with decades of authority. "Miss Thorne, please sit." He gestured to a surprisingly comfortable leather chair. "I've been reviewing your rather unconventional career path." Here it comes, Evie thought, bracing herself. The gentle dismissal, the perhaps in a few years dear speech. "Your bar exam results were noteworthy," Judge Finch continued, a slight emphasis on the word, "particularly for someone undertaking studies under challenging circumstances." He paused, his gaze unwavering. "And then, this application for judicial appointment. Bold, Miss Thorne, very bold." Evie found her voice a reedy whisper. "Thank you, Your Honor. I realize it might seem ambitious," he supplied, the ghost of a smile playing on his lips. "Perhaps, or perhaps it shows a degree of tenacity this committee rarely sees." "Did you think, Miss Thorne, that such dedication, such a phoenix-like resurgence, if you will, would go entirely unnoticed in this city? Some of us still value true grit over polished pedigree." Evie blinked, stunned. This was not the conversation she'd anticipated. "Tell me, Miss Thorne," Finch leaned forward, his eyes surprisingly kind now. "Why the deliberate obscurity? Why hide your light under such a determined bushel?" And so Evie told him. Not everything. Not the raw, bleeding wounds of Julian's betrayal or her mother's relentless critiques, but enough. She spoke of the energy it took to fend off pity and unsolicited advice, of the family perception of her as the cautionary tale, of her desperate need to reclaim her narrative in silence, on her own terms, before anyone else could tarnish it further with their low expectations. Judge Finch listened, his expression unreadable. When she finished, the silence stretched, thick and heavy. Then he nodded slowly. "Your grandmother, Justice Vance," he said, his voice softer now, "often remarked that true steel is forged in the hottest fires, Miss Thorne, and usually in the deepest solitude, far from the chattering opinions of the crowd. She believed in you, you know. Saw that fire in you, even as a girl." Evie's eyes welled. Her grandmother. The one person who had always, unequivocally, believed. To hear her name, her wisdom, invoked by this formidable man, it was a balm to a wound she hadn't realized was still so raw. "The Judicial Selection Committee," Judge Finch continued, his tone shifting back to a more formal register, "has taken significant notice of your application. As have I. Your background, your resilience, your rather insightful answers to the preliminary essay questions, they paint a compelling picture." He steepled his fingers. "There will be a final panel interview. Next Thursday." Next Thursday. Evie's mind reeled. Serafina's wedding was that Saturday. The logistics, the emotional whiplash, could she possibly manage both? It was a collision of her two worlds, the secret, hopeful future slamming headlong into the judgmental, unavoidable present. As if reading her mind, a faint, almost imperceptible smile touched Judge Finch's lips. "Providence, perhaps, Miss Thorne, or merely excellent calendaring on the part of my ever-efficient clerk. The dates, I believe, do not conflict." He rose, extending a hand. "Prepare well. The panel can be rigorous." Rigorous was an understatement. The panel consisted of 5 individuals who looked as though they'd been carved from granite. 4 men and 1 woman, Judge Harriet Deaver, whose reputation for eviscerating unprepared candidates was legendary. The questions came thick and fast, probing, challenging, dissecting every aspect of Evie's life and career. And then Judge Deaver, her voice dripping with skepticism, leaned into her microphone. "Miss Thorne," she began, her eyes like chips of ice, Your file indicates a, shall we say, significant hiatus in your legal career following your graduation from Blackwood, followed by the dissolution of your marriage, and then single parenthood. Each word was a carefully placed stone, building a wall of disapproval. Can you assure this committee with absolute certainty that your domestic responsibilities, the euphemism was a slap in the face, and your past instability, another perfectly aimed dart, will not compromise the unwavering dedication, the round-the-clock commitment, and the unimpeachable impartiality required of the bench? Some might argue, Miss Thorne, that your path has been dangerously erratic for a position of such profound public trust. The air in the room crackled. This was it. The moment they tried to define her by her scars, not her strength. Evie met Judge Deaver's gaze, her own suddenly clear and unwavering. Her grandmother's words echoed, "Speak, child, speak." Judge Deaver, members of the committee, her voice was low, but it carried a surprising resonance. My path has indeed been unconventional, I grant you. It has not been the smooth, predictable trajectory some might prefer. She paused, letting the admission settle. But it has taught me things that cannot be learned in a classroom or a corporate law firm. It has taught me about resilience in the face of sudden abandonment and profound loss. It has taught me about managing critically scarce resources, both financial and emotional, with creativity and grit. It has taught me, most importantly, about the human cost when the system fails, when justice is delayed or denied to those who are most vulnerable. She looked directly at Judge Deaver. My domestic responsibilities, as you term them, being a mother to my daughter Lily, have instilled in me a profound and daily empathy for the everyday struggles, the hopes, and the fears of the very people who will one day appear before me. My past instability was not a detour, Your Honor. It was a crucible. It forged a strength, a clarity of purpose, and a depth of understanding I might never have found on an easier road. Her voice rose, just a fraction, filled with a conviction that surprised even herself. I believe these experiences, far from disqualifying me, make me more qualified to serve. To serve with intellect, yes, but also with compassion, with humility, and with an unwavering commitment to the true, human face of justice. Silence. A different kind of silence this time. Not judgmental, but considering. Judge Finch's expression remained neutral, but Evie thought she saw a flicker of something. Approval? In his eyes. The days that followed were an agonizing blur of wedding preparations, a desperate hunt for a presentable dress at a downtown consignment shop, Lily's excited chatter about flower petals, and the gnawing uncertainty of the committee's decision. Every ring of the phone made Evie jump. Then, late on a Friday afternoon, as she was packing a small overnight bag for the dreaded wedding weekend, it came. Judge Finch's judicial assistant. Miss Thorne, the committee has reached a unanimous decision. Judge Finch asked me to convey personally. A pause that stretched Evie's nerves to the breaking point. The appointment is yours, Miss Thorne, should you choose to accept. The world tilted. The cheap linoleum of her kitchen floor seemed to sway beneath her feet. The appointment is yours. After all the years of struggle, of sacrifice, of being the cautionary tale, of the shattering gavel in her dreams, tears, hot and unexpected, streamed down Evie's face. Yes, she choked out, sinking onto a kitchen chair. Oh yes, I accept. Thank you. Please, thank Judge Finch. Thank the committee. Thank you. Lily, drawn by the commotion, rushed in. Mommy? Mommy, are you crying? Did you win a prize? A big prize. Evie pulled her daughter into a fierce hug, laughing through her tears. Yes, Starlight. The biggest prize. The very, very biggest. And in their tiny cramped apartment they danced. A wild, joyous, tear-soaked dance of triumph, Lily giggling, Evie feeling a lightness she hadn't known in years. Later, as Lily slept, curled up with Sparklehoof, Evie made a decision. This news, this monumental, life-altering achievement, would remain her secret, for now. Seraphina's wedding, for all its attendant pain, was still Seraphina's day. Evie wouldn't overshadow it. There would be time enough for revelations later, on her own terms. So, as she carefully folded the deep sapphire blue dress she'd found, elegant, understated, and miraculously on sale, into her worn suitcase, she also slipped another document into the false bottom of her old leather briefcase, the one that usually held Kressler on evidence. It was the official letter of appointment from the governor's office, the heavy paper embossed with the state crest. She ran her fingers over the raised seal, a slow, almost fierce smile touching her lips. The weight of her secret was no longer just a burden. It was a shield, an armor forged in silence and fire. "Let them talk," she whispered to the empty room, the city lights twinkling like distant, unknowing stars. "Let them judge. They have absolutely no idea what's coming." Armed with this silent triumph, she prepared to step into the glittering arena of her sister's wedding, a place where she anticipated only judgment, never dreaming it might also become the stage for an entirely different kind of justice. The heavy official letter confirming her judicial appointment, hidden like a secret heart beneath the worn lining of her briefcase, was Evelyn Thorne's armor. Or so she'd hoped. As her ancient, sputtering but beloved sedan, affectionately nicknamed the little engine that could, barely, by Lily, chugged its way up the long, winding drive to the Sterling Crest Manor, Evie felt that armor begin to crack. The sheer, ostentatious wealth of the place was an assault. Manicured lawns stretched like emerald carpets, fountains glittered with a blatant disregard for water conservation, and the parking lot already resembled a showroom for European supercars. Bentleys, Rolls-Royces, things with unpronounceable Italian names. And then there was Evie's 15-year-old car, coughing apologetically as she found a spot in the farthest, darkest corner. Lily, however, was enchanted. "Mommy, it's a castle," she breathed, her nose pressed to the smudged window. "Are there real knights and dragons and a king and queen?" "Just your Auntie Sarah and soon-to-be Uncle Marcus, Starlight," Evie said, managing a smile that felt brittle. "And probably no dragons, let's hope." As they stepped out, Evie smoothing down her sapphire blue consignment shop dress. Elegant, yes, but she was agonizingly aware of a tiny, persistent water stain near the hem she hadn't quite managed to eradicate. The first barrage came. "Is that Evelyn Thorne?" The whisper, sharp as shattered glass, carried on the breeze from two impeccably coiffed matrons dripping in old money diamonds. "Goodness, I hardly recognized her. What on earth is she doing here, and with a child? I thought Serafina had standards." Evie's hand instinctively tightened on Lily's. She kept her chin high, a queen in her own right, albeit one on a very tight budget, and guided Lily towards the grand, intimidating entrance of the manor. Lily, oblivious, skipped ahead, her simple pale yellow dress a splash of sunshine in the otherwise muted palette of expensive taupes and navies. The bridal suite was a chaotic symphony of hairspray, frantic bridesmaids in identical silk robes, and Serafina Sterling, the bride-to-be, holding court like a minor deity. She air-kissed vaguely in Evie's direction. "Oh, Evelyn, you actually made it." Her eyes, the color of glacial ice, flicked over Evie's dress, lingering for a damning microsecond on the faint water stain Evie had prayed no one would notice. "How quaint of you to come." Before Evie could respond, their mother, Eleanor Thorne, descended, a vision in dove gray and disapproval. "Evelyn, your hair, it's simply unfortunate." Eleanor's perfectly sculpted eyebrows arched. "That style does nothing for your face, makes you look so terribly drawn. Didn't I tell you to see Antoine? He does wonders, even with challenging material." Then her gaze fell upon Lily, and her smile, if possible, became even more strained. "And Lily, darling, such a simple little dress, but sweet, I suppose, in a rustic sort of way." Lily, bless her innocent heart, just beamed. "Grandma, Mommy said I can be a flower fairy for Auntie Sarah." "How charming," Eleanor murmured, already turning back to fuss with a fold in Serafina's voluminous train. The dismissal was complete. The slights, both subtle and overt, continued like a persistent, stinging rain. Chloe, Sarah's maid of honor and chief sycophant, offered Evie a flute of champagne with an overly bright smile. When Evie politely declined, requesting water instead, Sarah, watching from her throne-like makeup chair, drawled, "Still the responsible teetotaler, I see, Evelyn. Or perhaps just careful with unfamiliar indulgences, darling." The implication hung heavy. You can't handle it, or you can't afford it. Which was it today? Later, as a makeup artist fussed over Sarah's already flawless face, Chloe turned to Evie, her voice carrying. "So Evelyn, what is it you do these days? Sarah mentioned something about filing at a little law firm?" Sarah let out a tinkling, brittle laugh. "Oh, she was supposed to be a brilliant lawyer, you know. Top of her class at Blackwood. Summa cum laude, weren't you, Evie? Everyone had such astronomically high hopes." Her eyes met Evie's in the mirror, cold and triumphant. Then she, Well, she rather spectacularly threw it all away for that disastrous little marriage to that charming conman, Julian Croft. Didn't you, darling? Now she's a paralegal, pushing paper. Such a tragic waste of a good brain, wouldn't you agree? The barb landed. It always did. Evie's attempts to engage anyone in polite conversation were met with blank stares or abrupt turnings away. She was a ghost at this feast, a specter of past failures. The ceremony itself was a breathtaking display of wealth and impeccable taste, held in the manor's sprawling rose garden. An actual string quartet played Vivaldi. Actual doves were released at some point. Evie and Lily, however, found their names on tiny, almost apologetic place cards at table 37, tucked away by the service entrance, where the clatter of the kitchen staff provided an unwelcome percussion to the quartet's efforts. Their tablemates were a collection of equally unfortunate distant relatives of the groom and a nervous-looking junior accountant from Marcus Sterling's father's firm. The social leper colony, Evie thought with a grim internal smile. Whispers, like malicious butterflies, flitted around them. That's the Thorne girl, the one who, failed. Divorced, isn't she? And bringing her child to an event like this. Such a shame, really, after all that early promise. I heard Julian Croft left her absolutely penniless. No wonder she looks like that. Lily, bless her 7 years, was starting to notice. "Mommy," she whispered, tugging on Evie's sleeve during a lull in the vows, her small face clouded with confusion. "Why are those ladies looking at us like I forgot to wear shoes?" Evie's heart clenched. She pulled Lily closer, forcing a bright smile. "They're just admiring your sparkly hair clips, Starlight. It's dazzling them." A lie that tasted like ash in her mouth. How do you protect your child from the casual cruelty of a world that judges so harshly? Especially when that cruelty comes from your own blood? Throughout the ceremony, Evie was acutely aware of Marcus Sterling, the groom. Tall, impeccably handsome in his bespoke tuxedo, he exuded an aura of quiet power and unshakable confidence, the perfect match for Serafina's relentless ambition. But several times, Evie caught him looking at her. His gaze wasn't pitying, like so many others. It was focused, unreadable, almost analytical, as if he were trying to solve a particularly complex puzzle. It was unnerving. Did he know her story? Sarah's carefully curated version of it, no doubt. What did he think of the cautionary tale he was about to acquire as a sister-in-law? And then there was another observer. During a quiet moment, as the string quartet played a poignant interlude, Evie noticed an older gentleman, impeccably dressed in a style that spoke of old money and even older influence, staring at her. Intently. His face was vaguely familiar, stirring a distant memory she couldn't quite grasp. There was a flicker of something in his eyes. Profound recognition, perhaps, or was it? Could it be? Respect? He didn't approach, didn't smile, just held her gaze for a long, searching moment before making a small, almost imperceptible note in a tiny, leather-bound notebook he produced from his breast pocket. Then he looked away. But the intensity of his scrutiny lingered, another unsettling thread in the already frayed tapestry of the day. Who was he? And what did he see when he looked at Evelyn Thorne? The cocktail hour was an exercise in polite invisibility. Evie guided Lily through the throngs of chattering guests, a fragile bubble of maternal protection around her daughter. Her parents, Eleanor and Arthur, held court at a prominent table near the champagne fountain, her father occasionally casting an uncomfortable, apologetic glance her way, before being drawn back into Eleanor's animated conversation with a woman whose jewels probably outvalued Evie's annual salary. Aunts, uncles, cousins she'd grown up with sailed past, some offering a curt nod, others looking straight through her as if she were made of glass. The ostracization was palpable, a cold, suffocating blanket. Lily, after an initial flurry of excitement over the miniature quiches, began to droop. "Mommy, can we sit down? My legs are tired of being a fairy." They found their designated Siberia, table 37, the clatter from the kitchen a constant reminder of their place in this glittering hierarchy. Evie tried to engage their tablemates in conversation, but they seemed as eager to escape the social exclusion zone as she was. The tension in the air was thick enough to spread on the artisanal bread rolls that Evie couldn't quite bring herself to eat. Every smile felt like a betrayal of the anger simmering just beneath her surface. Every polite nod felt like a surrender. The letter in her briefcase, the one with the governor's seal, felt a million miles away, a dream from another lifetime. Here, in the gilded cage of Sterling Crest Manor, she was just Evelyn Thorne. The footnote, the cautionary tale, and the afternoon she knew with a sinking heart was far from over. The main event, her sister's triumph, was yet to truly begin. And with it, Evie suspected, the sharpest barbs were still being readied. The carefully constructed dam of Evelyn Thorne's composure, already fissured by 1,000 tiny cracks throughout the excruciating afternoon, was about to shatter. The clinking of Seraphina Sterling's champagne flute against a crystal water goblet, a sound as delicate and deadly as a stiletto's tap, silenced the already muted conversations at the outlying tables. Evie knew, with a sickening lurch in her stomach, that this was it, the main event. Her sister, resplendent in a cloud of ivory lace and smug satisfaction, was taking center stage, and the spotlight, Evie instinctively understood, was about to become an interrogation lamp. "My dearest friends, cherished family," Sarah began, her voice a silken purr that nonetheless carried to the farthest corners of the grand ballroom at Sterling Crest Manor. Her eyes, glittering with something far colder than bridal joy, found Evie's across the expanse of Damascus diamonds. "Oh, here we go. Marcus and I are just so overwhelmed by your love and support on this, our perfect day." A beat, a perfectly timed theatrical pause. "And speaking of support and family, I'd like to raise a special toast." Another pause, drawing out the suspense, every eye now following Sarah's gaze towards the social Siberia of table 37. "To my dear sister Evelyn." A wave of something rippled through the room. Not quite shocked silence, more like a collective indrawn breath of morbid anticipation. What fresh hell was this? Eleanor Thorne, Evie's mother, offered a brittle, encouraging laugh that died almost instantly under the weight of the room's sudden tension. Even Arthur, Evie's father, shifted uncomfortably in his gilded chair, his gaze flicking nervously between his two daughters. Sarah's smile widened, a predatory curve. "For those of you perhaps unacquainted with the more colorful branches of the Thorne family tree," she continued, her voice dripping with false sweetness, "allow me to introduce you to our very own, very special cautionary tale." The air crackled. A few nervous titters sputtered out, quickly extinguished by Sarah's commanding presence. From Blackwood Law valedictorian, can you even imagine it? Destined for greatness, or so we all thought. Sarah took a delicate sip of champagne, her eyes never leaving Evie. To this. A vague, dismissive wave of her hand encompassed Evie, Lily, their very existence. A divorced single mother, practically a charity case. Bless her heart. Always such a flair for the dramatic exit, our Evie, usually right before the real work is done, or when things get a little challenging. She'd sked, a sound of pure, unadulterated malice. Some of you might remember that unfortunate little scandal with the Atherton Scholarship Fund at Blackwood. Evie was so involved in its administration. And then, poof, the funds vanished, just like Evie's first fiancé. Coincidence, I'm sure. The gasp went around the room. Evie felt the blood drain from her face. The Atherton Fund, that had been a vicious, untrue rumor started years ago, one she thought long dead. How could Sarah resurrect it now, here? Lily, sensing the shift in atmosphere, the sheer venom in her aunt's tone, pressed closer to Evie, her small hand seeking Evie's. "Mommy," she whispered, her voice trembling, "why is Auntie Sarah saying those awful things? Is she a wicked witch from my storybooks?" Tears pricked at Evie's eyes, but she blinked them back. "Not here. Not in front of them." "It's okay, Starlight," she murmured, her voice dangerously low. "Auntie Sarah is just telling stories. Let's get some fresh air, shall we?" She made to rise to gather Lily to escape this public crucifixion. But Eleanor Thorne was on her feet, a look of faint concern warring with the triumph in her eyes. "Oh, Evelyn, darling, don't be so sensitive. Seraphina is just being Seraphina. You know her playful ways." Her voice hardened, the velvet glove slipping to reveal the iron fist. "Besides," she added, her words a venomous hiss meant for Evie but audible to the surrounding tables, "why would anyone truly want damaged goods, dear? A broken marriage? A child out of wedlock with a man who couldn't even be bothered to stick around? At least Seraphina knows how to choose a proper man, a Sterling, no less. And more importantly, how to keep him. Unlike some people we know who couldn't even manage that simple, fundamental feat." The cruelty of it was breathtaking. A A collective shock sucked the remaining air from the room. Several guests openly gasped. Arthur Thorne looked physically ill, his face pale, but he remained rooted to his seat, shrinking under Eleanor's subsequent icy glare. This was the peak, the absolute nadir. Humiliation, hot and suffocating, washed over Evie. Her hands began to shake, but then she felt Lily's small, trembling hand tighten in hers, and something inside her, something forged in years of solitude and struggle, solidified into pure, unadulterated steel. She would not let them break her in front of her child. She stood, pulling Lily gently with her. "Come, my brave queen," she whispered, for Lily's ears alone. "Our chariot awaits." They were halfway to the grand double doors, the silence of the room a palpable entity pressing against their backs, when a voice, calm but carrying an undeniable edge of command, sliced through the tension. "If I may, Seraphina? Mother Thorne?" Every head swiveled. Marcus Sterling, the groom, stood beside his new bride, his expression unreadable, yet radiating a quiet authority that instantly silenced even the most persistent whisperers. He wasn't looking at his wife or his new mother-in-law. He was looking directly at Evelyn Thorne. With a deliberate, almost unnervingly calm movement, he took the microphone from Seraphina's suddenly slackened grip. Her perfectly painted smile faltered, confusion, and was that a flicker of fear? Dawning in her eyes. "For those of you," Marcus began, his voice now resonating through the ballroom, each word clear and precise, "who have so thoroughly enjoyed this rather unconventional form of family toast." His gaze swept the room, cold and appraising, making more than a few of the bejeweled guests squirm. "I believe I have a few pertinent words to add. I'd like to offer a more accurate introduction to my sister-in-law, Miss Evelyn Thorne." He paused, letting the anticipation build, his eyes locking with Evie's across the room. And then the thunderclap. "Or, as she is now more formally known within the hallowed halls of our city's judiciary, Your Honor." Absolute, stunned silence. You could have heard a diamond drop. Not a glass clinked, not a breath was drawn. Eleanor Thorne's perfectly lipsticked mouth fell open, a grotesque parody of surprise. Seraphina's face, just moments before alight with triumphant malice, crumbled. It was as if she'd been slapped. Hard. Gasps, this time of pure, unadulterated shock, rippled through the room. Heads swiveled between Evie, frozen near the doorway, and Marcus, now commanding the room with an effortless power that eclipsed even Seraphina's practiced drama. "What none of you, it seems, are aware of," Marcus continued, his voice a low, dangerous rumble, "is that Miss Evelyn Thorne, while working full-time at Hawthorne and Finch and raising her remarkable daughter Lily entirely on her own, also found the time to study for and pass the state bar examination. With the highest honors recorded in the last decade, I might add." More gasps. A buzz of incredulous murmuring started to build. "And furthermore," Marcus's voice cut through it, sharp and clear, "just last month, following a unanimous recommendation from the Judicial Selection Committee, headed by the esteemed Judge Alistair Finch, Miss Thorne was sworn in as a district court judge, the youngest to be appointed to that bench in this state's recent history." He turned his gaze fully upon Evie, a flicker of something that might have been admiration, or was it challenge, in his eyes. "I confess, Your Honor," he said, the title ringing out with undeniable respect, "I didn't place you immediately this afternoon, though your face was indeed familiar. It wasn't until the ceremony, when I saw the same fierce intelligence in your eyes, the same unwavering integrity, that I witnessed firsthand last week when you presided, with such impeccable logic and profound compassion, over the rather complex Harrington Trust litigation. A ruling, I might add," he swept his gaze over the now utterly silent and dumbfounded assembly, "that has the entire legal community not just buzzing, but taking very serious notes." Eleanor looked as though she might faint. Seraphina was stammering, her voice barely a croak. That's not possible. She's a paralegal. She's been filing papers for years." Marcus nodded gravely, his eyes still holding Evie's. "Indeed she has, Seraphina, while also attending night school, while also acing the bar exam, while also raising a truly exceptional child. All without a single word of complaint, and certainly without broadcasting her struggles or her many triumphs to a family that clearly offered neither support nor understanding." Across the room, Evie saw the mysterious older gentleman, Mr. Silas Blackwood. Yes, that's who he was. A a legendary benefactor of Blackwood law, her grandmother's oldest friend. Nod slowly, a look of profound understanding and quiet vindication dawning on his aristocratic features. He raised his champagne flute in a silent, respectful toast to Evelyn. Marcus Sterling was not finished. His gaze, now openly scornful, fell upon his bride and his mother-in-law. Judge Thorne, he declared, his voice ringing with conviction, chose to keep her extraordinary achievement quiet this weekend. She wished not to overshadow this celebration, despite the welcome she has received. That, I believe, speaks volumes about her character, her dignity, and her grace. Qualities some of us here today, his eyes raked over Serafina and Eleanor, might do well to emulate. He let that sink in, the silence in the room so profound it was almost a physical force. Then, with a final sweeping look at the astonished guests, he concluded, his voice dropping to a resonant calm, I believe we have all grievously misjudged someone today. And perhaps, if we are wise, we have also learned a valuable, if somewhat uncomfortable lesson about the danger of looking only at superficial appearances, and the quiet, indomitable power of a spirit that refuses to be broken. He placed the microphone carefully back on the stand, leaving the master of ceremonies gaping like a landed fish. The spell was broken, but the world, for everyone in that room, and most especially for Evelyn Thorne, had just irrevocably and spectacularly tilted on its axis. The echo of Marcus Sterling's final damning words, a spirit that refuses to be broken, hung in the vast, suddenly tomb-like silence of the Sterling Crest Manor ballroom. Broken glass, indeed. Illusions had been shattered, reputations realigned, and the carefully constructed facade of the Thorne family's perfectible image lay in glittering, irreparable shards on the Persian carpet. For a heart-stopping moment, no one moved. No one breathed. Serafina Sterling stood frozen, her face a mask of chalky disbelief, the triumphant bride transformed into a bewildered statue. Eleanor Thorne looked as if she'd been struck by lightning. Even the usually unflappable master of ceremonies was, for once, utterly speechless, his jaw agape. Evelyn Thorne, still standing near the grand doorway with Lily's small hand clutching hers, felt the colossal weight of hundreds of pairs of eyes swing towards her. But this time the stares were different. Gone was the pity, the scorn, the dismissive curiosity. In its place was shock, awe, and a dawning, almost fearful respect. What just happened? Did they hear that right? Judge Thorne? Before Evie could even process the seismic shift, before she could usher Lily out of the suffocating atmosphere, a distinguished-looking man with a mane of silver hair and an air of gravitas detached himself from a nearby group. He moved towards her, hand extended, his voice, when he spoke, resonating with genuine admiration. Judge Thorne, he began, his eyes crinkling at the corners with a warm smile. Wallace Harrington, of Harrington, Sloan & Pierce. Forgive my presumption in approaching you so informally, but your ruling in the Abernathy Trust case last month? It was, if I may say so, simply magnificent, a masterclass in judicial reasoning. We've all been following your nascent career with considerable interest, Your Honor. It's a privilege to finally make your acquaintance. Evie, momentarily stunned by the direct address and the sheer, unexpected warmth of his praise, found herself shaking his hand. Mr. Harrington, thank you, that's very kind. Not kind, Your Honor, merely accurate, he beamed. We're hosting a Bar Association luncheon next month on emerging judicial philosophies. We would be deeply honored if you would consider being our keynote speaker. Before Evie could even formulate a reply, others began to materialize from the stunned throng. Partners from rival law firms, their expressions a mixture of chagrin and newfound respect. A rather flustered-looking state senator, Alistair Finch's contemporary on the Judicial Oversight Committee, who now looked at Evie as if seeing her for the first time, stammering his own congratulations. The air around Evie, so recently thick with contempt, now vibrated with a strange, exhilarating energy. Lily, her earlier distress forgotten in the face of this new, bewildering attention, tugged at Evie's sapphire blue sleeve. "Mommy," she whispered, her eyes like saucers, Are you famous now? Like a superhero judge on TV?" Evie squeezed her daughter's hand, a shaky laugh escaping her. "Something like that, Starlight. Something just like that." And then, through the slowly parting sea of astonished faces, came Eleanor Thorne. Her usually imperious composure was, well, shattered. She looked flustered, her face a battleground of conflicting emotions. Shock, disbelief, and the rapidly dawning, entirely opportunistic realization that her cautionary tale of a daughter had just become a rather significant social asset. "Evelyn!" Eleanor exclaimed, her voice a little too loud, a little too bright. She rushed forward, hands fluttering. "A judge? A district court judge? My dearest girl, why on earth didn't you tell us? Your father and I had absolutely no idea. We are simply bursting with pride." Evie met her mother's gaze, her own calm and steady. The years of hurt, of dismissal, of being made to feel small and inadequate hadn't vanished. Oh no. But in this moment, they had lost their power to wound. "I found, Mother," she said, her voice quiet but carrying a newfound, unshakable dignity, "that my ambitions, my dreams, tended to thrive rather better in silence, without the constant commentary and unsolicited advice." Eleanor flinched, a flicker of genuine discomfort in her eyes, social mask slammed back into place. She was acutely aware of the very important eyes now watching this little family drama unfold. Including, Evie noted with a certain grim satisfaction, the keen, assessing gaze of Mr. Silas Blackwood, who was observing the entire exchange with the intensity of a hawk. "Well, of course," Eleanor trilled, recovering quickly, her voice now aimed at the wider audience. "We are immensely proud. My daughter, Judge Evelyn Thorne. I always knew she had it in her, didn't I, Arthur?" She turned to her husband, who had finally managed to extricate himself and now stood looking pale and overwhelmed beside her. Arthur Thorne simply nodded, a lost look in his eyes. "So determined are Evelyn," Eleanor gushed on. "We shall absolutely be at your formal swearing-in ceremony, darling, front row. And we simply must arrange a celebratory dinner. Perhaps at the Oakmont? Or would the Sterling Crest be more appropriate now, do you think?" The sheer, breathtaking speed of her mother's revisionist history was almost comical, but Evie merely inclined her head. "The swearing-in is on Tuesday, Mother, 10 o'clock, County Courthouse, Ceremonial Courtroom 1. Lily will be holding the Bible. Wouldn't miss it for the world," Eleanor declared, already mentally composing the guest list for her celebratory party. Arthur, however, stepped forward, his usual bluster gone. He reached out, his hand trembling slightly, and touched Evie's arm. "Evelyn," he said, his voice thick with unshed tears. Your grandmother, Justice Vance. She would have been so incredibly proud today. As am I, my dear. More than words can say." And that, Evie realized with a sudden sharp pang, was perhaps the truest thing her father had said to her in years. Across the now buzzing ballroom, Evie spotted Serafina. Her sister stood alone, a desolate figure amidst the wreckage of her perfectly orchestrated day, the magnificent tiered wedding cake behind her looking almost like a monument to a fallen empire. Her bridal perfection was marred, not by a misplaced curl or a smudge of lipstick, but by a raw, visible shock that seemed to have stripped away her usual armor of arrogance. "Excuse me, Father," Evie said, a new, quiet authority in her voice. "There's someone I need to speak to." She moved towards her sister, the crowd parting before her now with a deference that was almost dizzying. When she reached Serafina, they stood for a moment in an awkward, charged silence. The air crackled with unspoken words, with years of resentment and misunderstanding. Finally, Serafina spoke, her voice tight, brittle. "Well, Evelyn," she couldn't quite meet Evie's eyes. You certainly know how to steal a show, don't you?" Quite the entrance. The bitterness was still there, but it was underscored by a new, raw note of something else. Confusion? Defeat? "This wasn't my doing, Sarah," Evie said, her voice gentle but firm. "I never intended for any of this to happen today. This is your wedding day." Serafina's carefully constructed composure finally cracked. A single, mascara-laden tear traced a path down her cheek. "Why?" she whispered, her voice choked. "Why didn't you tell me? Tell any of us all this time, all these years I thought you were." "That I was a failure," Evie finished softly. "A footnote? The family's cautionary tale?" Serafina nodded, looking away, a flush of what might have been genuine shame coloring her neck. "That speech," she mumbled, gesturing vaguely towards the microphone. "It was vile. I'd had too much champagne. And I was jealous." "Jealous?" Evie was stunned. "Jealous of what, Sarah? You've always had everything. The looks, the money, Dad and Mother's undivided adoration." "But I never had your brain, Evie," Sarah burst out, her voice raw with a pain Evie had never suspected. You were always the brilliant one, the one who aced everything without even trying, the one who was going to set the world on fire. Growing up in your shadow, it was like being slowly erased. And then when Julian left and you were just struggling for the first time, I was the one everyone looked at, the successful sister, the one who had it all. And it felt so good to finally not be second best. Her shoulders slumped. And now this, Judge Thorne, it's like it's all happening all over again. The confession, so raw, so unexpected, hung between them. Years of toxic rivalry, of misunderstanding, of carefully nurtured resentments, laid bare in a few painful sentences. Was this the new dawn, or just more broken glass? Marcus Sterling materialized beside them then, his expression a mixture of concern for his clearly distraught bride and a deep, unwavering respect for Evie. He placed a comforting hand on Sarah's trembling shoulder before turning to Evie. "Judge Thorne," he said, his voice formal but kind. He extended his hand. "Please accept my sincerest apologies for our family's truly appalling lack of grace this afternoon. I couldn't stand by, Your Honor, while a respected member of the judiciary and," he added, a softer note entering his voice, "my new sister-in-law was subjected to such a public mauling. It was unconscionable." Evie took his offered hand. His grip was firm, steady. "Thank you, Mr. Sterling. Your intervention was unexpected and appreciated. I genuinely look forward to appearing in your courtroom, Your Honor," he said, a ghost of a smile playing on his lips. "Though I have a distinct feeling you'll give me a formidable run for my money." Evie allowed herself a small, genuine smile in return, the first one that had reached her eyes all day. "I assure you, Counselor Sterling, I maintain strict impartiality in my courtroom. You will be treated no differently than any other officer of the court who has the misfortune of drawing my bench." Marcus chuckled. A rich, warm sound. "I would expect, and indeed hope for, nothing less, Your Honor." He then lowered his voice slightly. "Serafina, she has her complexities. This day, it hasn't gone as planned for her either. Perhaps with time." Evie nodded, understanding more than he knew. Perhaps. As she and Lily finally made their way out of the grand ballroom, the atmosphere was utterly transformed. The whispers now were of awe, of speculation, of grudging admiration. Guests who had earlier looked through her now nodded respectfully, some even stepping aside to clear a path. When they reached the little engine that could, barely, parked bravely amongst the glittering flotilla of luxury vehicles, it no longer seemed quite so out of place. It looked authentic, real, a testament to a journey hard won. Buckling a sleepy but beaming Lily into her car seat, Evie felt a profound wave of exhaustion. Yes, but also something else. Something akin to peace. "Mommy," Lily murmured, her head lolling against the worn upholstery, "I'm really, really proud of you." Her small voice was thick with sleep, but her words were clear, resonant. "Not just because you're a superhero judge now, though that's super cool, but because you weren't mean back to Auntie Sarah and Grandma, even when they were being so yucky to you. You were still a queen." Evie's heart swelled, a painful, beautiful ache. She reached over and squeezed Lily's small hand. "Thank you, my brave little starlight," she whispered, her own voice thick with emotion. That means more to me than any title, any courtroom, any case ever could." The drive home was quiet, the city lights a welcoming blur. The real work, the mending, the true test of this new dawn was only just beginning. But for the first time in what felt like an eternity, Evelyn Thorne felt the unmistakable, exhilarating lightness of hope. The gavel in her dreams that night didn't shatter. It landed, solid and true. The drive home from Stirlingcrest Manor had been a strange, suspended passage of time. Lily's innocent words about not being mean back, echoing in Evelyn Thorne's heart with more profound validation than any public accolade could ever offer. The gavel in her dreams that night, for the first time in years, hadn't shattered. It had landed with a clean, decisive, authoritative crack. The sound of a future finally, irrevocably, beginning. The taste of ashes from Serafina's wedding was still there, a bitter residue, but beneath it something new and incredibly light. The exhilarating lightness of hope, no longer fragile, but forged. Tuesday morning dawned crisp and clear, the kind of autumn day that felt full of solemn promise. The ceremonial courtroom, one at the county courthouse, was a cathedral of justice, all dark, polished wood, towering columns, and the faint, lingering scent of old leather and lemon oil. A scent that, for Evie, was finally shedding its association with drudgery and instead taking on the aroma of destiny. "All rise," the bailiff's voice boomed, and a hush fell over the assembled crowd. And then she was walking, not as a paralegal, not as a footnote, but as Evelyn Grace Thorne, about to take her place. The black judicial robe felt impossibly heavy, yet simultaneously, like wings. "I, Evelyn Grace Thorne," her voice began, a little tremulous at first, then gaining strength, clear and steady, resonating through the august chamber, "do solemnly swear that I will support the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of this state, that I will administer justice without respect to persons, and do equal right to the poor and to the rich, and that I will faithfully and impartially discharge and perform all the duties incumbent upon me as district court judge, according to the best of my abilities and understanding, so help me God." Beside her, Lily, resplendent in a new sunshine yellow dress, a thoughtful, anonymous gift that had arrived from Judge Alistair Finch's office the day before, held the heavy, leather-bound Bible with a fierce, proud solemnity that mirrored Evie's own. It was her grandmother Vance's personal Bible, retrieved from storage, its pages thin and whisper-soft from decades of use, a tangible link to the legacy of justice Evie was now stepping into. Lily's small hands were surprisingly steady. Her gaze, fixed on Evie, was filled with an uncomplicated adoration that brought a lump to Evie's throat. In the front row, impeccably dressed and radiating a carefully curated aura of parental pride, sat Eleanor and Arthur Thorne. Eleanor's smile was a masterpiece of social engineering, a dazzling display for the benefit of the assembled dignitaries, though Evie caught the flicker of lingering disbelief, and was that a hint of calculation, in her mother's eyes. Arthur, however, looked genuinely moved, his face etched with an emotion Evie hadn't seen there in years. Raw, undisguised pride. He met Evie's gaze and gave an encouraging, almost tearful nod. And behind them, a row back, sat Seraphina and Marcus Sterling. Sarah looked uncomfortable, subdued. Her usual vibrant confidence noticeably dimmed, but she was there. Marcus, beside her, watched the proceedings with a quiet, unreadable intensity, his expression one of respectful observation. Their very presence was a seismic shift, a testament to the power of the truth that had detonated at the wedding reception. How fragile these new beginnings felt. Would they last? Could this fractured legacy truly begin to mend? The small, dignified reception afterwards, held in the grand, echoing rotunda of the courthouse, was a blur of handshakes, murmured congratulations, and the unfamiliar sensation of being the undisputed center of positive attention. Colleagues from Hawthorne and Finch, who had once barely registered her existence, now approached with newfound respect, offering slightly awestruck congratulations. Lawyers she had only known by reputation, partners from the city's most prestigious firms, even the state attorney general, all made a point of welcoming Judge Thorne to the bench. Mr. Silas Blackwood, her grandmother's old friend, clasped her hand warmly, his eyes twinkling. "Justice Vance would have burst her buttons with pride today, Evelyn," he grumbled. "She always said you had the sharpest mind in the family. Took you long enough to prove her right publicly, eh?" Eleanor, naturally, was in her element, gliding through the crowd, a proud peacock. "My daughter, Judge Thorne," she'd announced to anyone who would listen, and many who were clearly trying not to. "Yes, we always knew she had it in her. Such a brilliant legal mind. It simply runs in the Thorne-Vance family, you know?" Her grandmother, the late Justice Vance, would be simply beaming today. "We're planning a small, intimate dinner party at the Sterling Crest next month. You simply must come, Senator, to properly introduce our Evelyn to, well, to everyone who matters." Evie watched her mother's performance with a detached sort of amusement. The leopard, it seemed, hadn't entirely changed its spots. But perhaps, just perhaps, the spots were a little less aggressively patterned today. It was Arthur, her father, who sought her out when Eleanor was momentarily distracted by a gaggle of reporters from the legal journals. He looked different, smaller, somehow, yet more substantial. The usual bluster was gone, replaced by a raw vulnerability that touched Evie to her core. "Evelyn," he began, his voice thick with unshed tears, his hand reaching for hers, trembling slightly. "That woman up there, taking that oath, that magnificent, strong woman, that was the daughter I always knew was hidden inside you. The one your grandmother saw from the very beginning. He swallowed hard, his gaze meeting hers with a painful honesty. I owe you an apology, my dear girl, a profound one. For all the years, for all the times I let your mother's disappointments, her relentless critiques, drown out my own pride in your strength, your incredible resilience, especially after Julian, after you had Lily, and you were struggling so much. His voice broke. I should have stood up for you more, Evie. I should have been a better father, a stronger man. Can you ever forgive an old fool? Tears welled in Evie's own eyes. Oh, Daddy, she whispered, squeezing his hand. There's nothing to forgive. You're here now. That's all that matters. But it wasn't entirely true, was it? There was a mountain of things to forgive. Years of quiet neglect and loud disapproval. Yet, in this moment, seeing the genuine remorse in her father's eyes, feeling the unaccustomed warmth of his pride, a significant piece of that mountain seemed to crumble into dust. Later, as the reception began to wind down, Serafina approached, Marcus a steadfast, supportive presence just behind her. Sarah looked diminished. The usual fire in her eyes was banked, replaced by a hesitant, almost fearful uncertainty. Well, Evelyn, she began, her voice barely above a whisper. She couldn't quite meet Evie's gaze. Judge Thorne, I suppose I should say. She offered a stiff, awkward hand. Congratulations. The robe, it suits you. A faint blush crept up her neck. More than that dreadful blue thing you wore to my wedding anyway. A flash of the old Sarah. Evie almost smiled. Almost. Thank you for coming, Serafina, Evie said, accepting the hesitant handshake. It means a great deal to me, and to Lily. Sarah finally looked up, her eyes swimming with a complex mix of emotions Evie couldn't quite decipher. Shame? Regret? Still a healthy dose of resentment? Probably all of the above. I suppose I should apologize, she mumbled, staring at a point somewhere over Evie's shoulder. For the wedding. For everything, really. I was appallingly drunk, and if I'm being brutally, horribly honest, I was appallingly jealous. Jealous? Evie echoed, genuinely surprised despite everything. Of what, Sarah? You always seem to have everything you ever wanted. Everything I supposedly threw away. Sarah let out a short, bitter laugh. Did I? Or did I just have the things mother and father deemed important? The right fiancé, the right address, the right social circle? Her gaze was direct now, and shockingly vulnerable. You, Evie, you always had yourself, your own mind, your own astonishing fire. Even when it was banked so low I thought it had gone out, it was still there, wasn't it? Smoldering, waiting. When Julian did what he did, and everything seemed to implode for you, a terrible part of me, a part I'm not proud of, felt validated. Like maybe, just maybe, for once in my damned life I could finally be the one who got it right, the successful sister, the one they were all proud of. She gestured vaguely at Evie's black robe. And now, this. Full circle. Again. It's exhausting being me sometimes, you know? It wasn't a perfect apology. It was still laced with self-pity, with the ingrained patterns of a lifetime of toxic sibling rivalry. But it was honest, raw, a crack in the fortress of Serafina's disdain. A beginning, perhaps. Thank you for saying that, Sarah, Evie said softly, her voice full of a grace she hadn't known she possessed. It takes courage to admit that. Marcus stepped forward then, placing a gentle hand on his wife's arm. It does indeed, he said, his eyes meeting Evie's with quiet respect. We're both working on it, Your Honor. Later that afternoon, in the quiet solitude of her new, still somewhat bare chambers, Chambers 307, a world away from her cramped paralegal cubicle, Judge Alistair Finch formally presented Evelyn Thorne with her gavel. It was heavy, the wood a rich, polished mahogany, cool and smooth beneath her fingers. A small, engraved silver plaque gleamed, the Honorable Evelyn G. Thorne. Fiat justitia ruat caelum. Let justice be done though the heavens fall. Evie felt the weight of it, the responsibility, the sheer improbable reality of it. Solid, real. This gavel would not shatter. This gavel would sound. It would speak. She looked at her reflection, not in a mirror, but in the deeply polished wood of her new, imposing desk. The black robe, which had felt so alien just hours before, now seemed to settle around her shoulders with a surprising, comforting familiarity. Less like a costume, more like a second skin. An extension of the authority she had earned, not through privilege or connection, but through sheer, unadulterated grit. The journey had been brutal, isolating, A silent, lonely battle waged in the dead of night over lukewarm tea and dog-eared textbooks. But she was here. Finally. Not a footnote, not a cautionary tale. Judge Evelyn Thorne. Her father's shaky, tearful words from the reception echoed in her mind, a balm to wounds so old she'd forgotten they were still bleeding. "I'm proud of you, kiddo. So incredibly proud." The silver locket, her grandmother's legacy, felt warm against her skin, and she could almost hear Justice Vance's fierce, loving whisper. "Speak, child. Speak truth to power, and never ever let them silence you again." A slow smile touched Judge Thorne's lips. The mending had begun, and the work was just getting started. The weighty mahogany gavel, bearing the inscription Fiat Justitia Ruat Caelum, felt less like a symbol of an office achieved, and more like an extension of Evelyn Thorne's own hand these days. The journey from her cramped paralegal cubicle to these august, oak-paneled chambers hadn't just been a career move, it had been a forging. And the fire? Well, the fire had been her life. The work, as she'd mused on that transformative day of her swearing-in, was indeed just getting started, and the past 6 months had been a testament to that quiet, resolute vow. "Objection, counselor. That line of questioning presumes facts not in evidence. Sustained." Judge Evelyn Thorne's voice, calm, firm, and utterly impartial, resonated through the packed courtroom. At the prosecutor's table, Marcus Sterling, impeccably attired and looking every inch the formidable legal mind he was, gave a respectful nod. "My apologies, Your Honor. I shall rephrase." The city redevelopment bond fraud case was complex, a tangled web of shell corporations and political maneuvering, and Marcus was, as always, a tenacious prosecutor. But Judge Thorne was an equally tenacious jurist. She listened intently, her gaze missing nothing, her rulings swift, decisive, and rooted deeply in the law. There was no hint, not even a flicker, of the complicated family tapestry that bound them outside these walls. Here, she was simply Your Honor, and he, simply Counselor. The transformation from the whispered cautionary tale to this figure of quiet authority was, even to Evie herself, sometimes still a source of private wonder. But wonder never interfered with duty. The mending of her fractured family legacy, however, was a far more nuanced proceeding. Sunday dinners at Evie's apartment, a slightly larger, brighter space in a less fashionable but friendly neighborhood, a tangible sign of her new stability, had become a tentative, fragile tradition. The first few had been strained. Awkward silences punctuated by Eleanor Thorne's determinedly cheerful and often wildly inaccurate pronouncements on Evie's latest high-profile cases. "Evelyn, darling," Eleanor had chirped over roast chicken one recent Sunday. "That absolutely brilliant ruling you made on what was it? The res ipsa loquitur in that terribly complicated zoning dispute simply inspired. All the papers said so." The legal correspondent for the Chronicle practically swooned. Evie had merely smiled, gently correcting her mother on the finer points of tort law, while Lily giggled. "Grandma, Mommy says res ipsa means the thing speaks for itself, not the inspector is a loquacious ninny." Arthur Thorne, Evie's father, had chuckled then, a rare, genuine sound. "Well, your mother has a certain flair for the dramatic interpretation, Lilybug. But the core of it is true. Your mother, Judge Thorne." And his eyes, when they met Evie's, were filled with an unclouded pride that still made Evie's heart ache in a good way, "has a gift for listening to all sides of a story. A trait, I dare say, from which we could all learn a valuable lesson." He'd glanced meaningfully then, just for a moment, at Serafina, who had the good grace to study her wine glass with sudden, intense interest. Serafina. That was the most complex case of all. Their relationship, once a battlefield of unspoken resentments and open hostilities, was now a work in progress. The wedding day confession had been a crack in the ice, not a complete thaw. There were still moments of the old Sarah, a sharp remark here, a subtly condescending glance there. But they were fewer now, often followed by a flicker of, was it remorse, or just Marcus's quietly disapproving gaze from across the table? During that same Sunday dinner, as Lily was proudly showing her grandparents her latest science fair project, a surprisingly sophisticated model of a working volcano, Evie had taken a deep breath and made an announcement. "I've been thinking a great deal about access to justice, and about the particular hurdles faced by those juggling impossible demands." She looked around the table, her gaze steady. "So, I'm launching a mentorship program. The Justice Eleanor Vance Initiative, named for Grandma, of course, for single parents navigating law school or the early years of their legal careers. It's for those who, like I did, feel they're trying to climb Everest in flip-flops, with no Sherpa and a 50-pound backpack. Marcus had been the first to respond. "That's an outstanding initiative, Evelyn, Your Honor." He corrected himself with a slight smile. "Sterling and Finch would be honored to offer our support. Pro bono hours from our associates, perhaps a series of guest lectures on practice management." "Thank you, Marcus. That would be invaluable." Then the surprise. Serafina, who had been unusually quiet, cleared her throat. "Well," she said, a faint, uncharacteristic blush rising on her cheeks. "Someone will need to make sure the launch event doesn't look like it was catered by a truck stop, and the invitations, they'll need to be appropriate." She fiddled with her napkin. "That event planning, fundraising, that's rather my specialty, as you know. If you'd like some help, that is." She finally met Evie's eyes, a flicker of something unreadable there. "Consider it a belated wedding gift, or an apology, whichever you prefer." Evie was, for a moment, speechless. This was progress. Real, tangible progress. "Thank you, Serafina," she said, her voice gentle. "That would be really helpful, actually. I'd appreciate that very much." A fragile bridge, built on the rubble of past hurts, but a bridge nonetheless. Who knew where it might lead? A few weeks later, a flat, elegantly wrapped package arrived for Evie. The card, in Serafina's flamboyant script, read, "For your wall of triumphs," with, well, you know, S and M. Inside, nestled in tissue paper, was a heavy silver frame, and in it a photograph from Serafina's wedding. But it wasn't a picture of the bride and groom or the family posed in stiff formality. It was a candid shot, taken, Evie realized with a start, moments after Marcus's stunning revelation in the ballroom. It captured Evie, standing tall and somehow serene in her sapphire blue dress, Lily beaming with fierce pride beside her, her small hand tucked into Evie's. In the background, slightly out of focus, but unmistakably respectful, Marcus Sterling was raising his champagne flute in a silent toast. Serafina and Eleanor, Evie noted with a wry internal smile, were conspicuously absent from the frame, perhaps still reeling in some shadowed corner. Engraved on the silver frame, just below the image, were the words, "To the Honorable Evelyn Thorne, the strongest woman we know, may your gavel always ring true." Tears pricked Evie's eyes. This was more than an apology. This was an acknowledgement. A tribute. She found Lily in her bedroom, surrounded by a legion of stuffed animals and a half-finished drawing of a courthouse with a giant, smiling sun. "Look what Auntie Sarah and Uncle Marcus sent, Starlight." Lily's eyes widened at the photograph. "Wow, that's what Uncle Marcus told everyone you were a superhero judge, Mommy, remember? And all those people wanted to shake your hand." She paused, her brow furrowing in thought. "Mommy, are you glad we went to Auntie Sarah's horrible, yucky wedding now?" Evie looked at her daughter, at the fierce, unwavering belief in her eyes. She looked at the photograph in her hand, a frozen moment of unexpected vindication. She thought of the long, lonely years, the shattered dreams, the whispered judgments, the quiet, relentless climb back into the light. "Some journeys, my love," Evie said, her voice soft but sure, "are unexpectedly brutal. They take us through dark valleys and over impossibly steep mountains. But sometimes, Starlight, those are the very journeys that lead us exactly where we need to be, even if we didn't know the destination when we started." She smiled, a deep, genuine smile that reached every corner of her soul. "So yes, in the end, I'm very, very glad we went." Lily nodded, satisfied. "Me too, because now everyone knows how super-duper amazing you are, Judge Mommy." She threw her arms around Evie's neck. "You're the best queen ever." Evie held her daughter close, breathing in the scent of strawberry shampoo and unconditional love. "And you, my little sparkle fairy," she whispered into Lily's hair, "are the bravest, brightest star in my entire sky. The only person whose opinion truly matters has known all along." Later that evening, Evie placed the silver-framed photograph on the mantelpiece in her small, comfortable living room. It sat alongside Lily's vibrant school portraits, her own faded Blackwood Law diploma, and the official, handsomely framed certificate of her judicial appointment. A collection of true norths. A testament to a life reclaimed. She stood for a long moment, looking out her window at the glittering, indifferent city skyline. Tomorrow, Judge Evelyn Thorne would return to her courtroom. She would don the robe, pick up the gavel, and continue the work she was always meant to do. The path hadn't been what she'd planned, not by a million miles. It had been harder, crueler, and lonelier than she could ever have imagined. But standing here now, in the quiet strength of her own improbable victory, she wouldn't trade a single step of that brutal, beautiful journey. For it had led her here. Home. How many of us, she wondered, have faced down our own Seraphinas and Eleanors, armed with nothing but a hidden dream and an unbreakable, often unseen will? Perhaps, she thought with a final knowing smile, far more than the world ever suspects. And perhaps, just perhaps, that's where the real legends are born. Not in the spotlight, but in the quiet, resilient heart.